Hey, ladies and gentlemen, this is your host, Howard Blend, and welcome to Howard's Blend. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Howard's Blend plant-based protein powder with 20 grams of plant-based protein per serving to help aid in recovery. So once it becomes available, I will let you know, but at the moment, the only available flavor is chocolate. So in the future, plans to expand. More details to come. In this episode of Howard's Blend. Well, oakley dokley folks, we are back in the Batcave Studios. It is Sunday, March 14th, I believe. It's a beautiful day outside, a little rainy here in Frisco, Texas, just north of Dallas, but it's still a beautiful day. What's on tap for today's episode, you may be asking? All about caffeine. This is part of the pre-workout ingredients series. This is ingredient number 3. The first ingredient was beta-alanine. Then we went to citrulline/citrulline malate. Now we're talking about caffeine. So I'm going to give you a brief rundown of what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be going over 3 types of caffeine that I see in pre-workout supplements, kind of explaining a little bit on each. Then we're going to go into how caffeine gives us that, quote, like euphoric high when we take it, how it keeps us awake and alert, etc. So on a cellular level, how it can impact in our brain. Then we're going to go into dosage and then wrap it all up with negative side effects. So before we get into this, I need to give this disclaimer. I am not a scientist. I am not a professor. No, not a professor of like nutrition, I should say. A professor of bullshit is what some people would say. I am not a chemist. I don't have a PhD. I have a bachelor's in like business and technology type stuff. But the thing is, the reason why I bring this up is I read the research. I put all the sources that I use for the episode in the description of the show. But I do my best to make heads or tails of this. As I said, I'm not trained in this stuff. So a lot of these concepts are foreign to me, and I have to look at other resources trying to put it together. So I figure as I read this stuff, because I enjoy reading and learning about it, as I learn about it, I might as well go ahead and do an episode on it. So the information goes to you guys and gals out there. But I'm going to try to keep it as like high a level as possible. There are other episodes where I kind of went way into the weeds. I'm going to try to keep this one as high level as possible, and for future episodes as high level as possible. Not because I think you guys and gals won't understand it. Makes it easier for me because I don't understand 3/4 of the shit that I read. So, and it takes, a long time, a lot of research. I don't mind doing it, but I feel like I'm going way, way, way too deep where I could easily then, I mean, say easily, I guess it depends on who you ask. I could get someone on the show who can go way into more detail on it and then expose me whether I'm wrong on it or whether I actually got something right for once. So another reason I do this is because if any of you all out there find interest in what I'm talking about, then I leave it up to you. Take the responsibility to learn more about it yourself. I'm just trying to get a general knowledge of this stuff. I think it's fun, but don't take my word as gospel. Don't take what I say in this episode and say, oh, well, Howard said it, I'm going to start incorporating it. Always consult with the doctor first before you do any of this stuff because they have a lot more knowledge than I do. So all the legal mumbo jumbo out of the way, we're just going to jump right into the meat of the show. So I've looked at, a plethora. I'm going to use the 50-cent word here, a plethora of different pre-workout supplements. And I've looked at the supplement facts, the ingredients, etc., just to get an idea of what ingredients are in different supplements. Now, there are 3 forms of caffeine. There's actually a multitude of different forms of caffeine in terms of ingredients in pre-workout supplements. But the bulk of the caffeine content in supplements, from what I've seen, again, this is just anecdotal, this is my experience looking at supplements, come in 3 different forms. So I'm going to go from the one I see the most to the one I see the least, and that is caffeine anhydrous, dicaffeine malate, and caffeine citrate. And I have my notes over here to my right, but in the description of the show, there is an article. It's on tigerfitness.com where they go over. It seemed pretty simple, to understand the list of the different forms of caffeine and kind of an explanation of each is where I got the information from. So it's a good article. You might want to read it. So caffeine anhydrous. It's basically caffeine with the water extracted. Anhydrous means without water. So I believe the article said it has to be 5% or less water. So what you're left over with is a powder that is very potent because it's just there's no water in it. So it's like almost pure caffeine, so to speak. It's also very inexpensive to put in a product. So it's a good way to put a good amount of caffeine in a pre-workout supplement, but it's not going to cost you as much money as other forms, trademark forms, which is coming up next. So speaking of that, the dicaffeine malate, I think it's Infinity or something. It was listed in the article. I didn't put it down. I don't remember. I think that's the trademark form of a dicaffeine malate, just like, what is it? Carnosine. I think it's carnosine is the trademark form of beta-alanine. So if you're going to use that trademark form, it costs more money to put that in because now you're paying the company that actually has the trademark for that ingredient. So dicaffeine malate is caffeine bonded with malic acid to make caffeine malate. Just like with citrulline, they would say citrulline malate, which is what I've seen most often on pre-workout supplements. The ingredient for citrulline most often that I see is citrulline malate. So that's citrulline bonded with malic acid. I think I said earlier that I think malate was like malic acid with the hydrogen removed. I think I read that, hydrogen ion removed. I think I read that earlier. Again, I'm not a chemist. I don't know. I mean, I know an acid is a substance that has hydrogen to donate because it's so if it actually how am I going to say this here? Because again, maybe I shouldn't say it at all because I don't know this stuff. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that. It has hydrogen ions to donate. And I think I read that somewhere, so that's why I said it. I probably should have made note of the source. It doesn't really matter. The point is that you have caffeine and malic acid together to make dicaffeine malate. So the benefit of that, or at least one of the benefits listed in the article, is that it can help with like stomach upset, digestive issues that could accompany taking caffeine, which we'll get into later when we get into the side effects. We'll get into like acid reflux, etc. So that's the second form. Third form is caffeine citrate. I'm going to have to look at my notes because I forgot. So it's like caffeine. Let's see if I can remember it without looking. It was caffeine mixed with citric acid monohydrate. Let me see, I forgot. And sodium citrate dihydrate. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Again, I'm not a chemist. So it's like a combination of those 3 ingredients. So the benefit of the caffeine citrate is you feel the effects faster. So I'm just going off the top of my head. I don't remember. I think I remember reading it, but somewhere, if you take caffeine like on an empty stomach, it takes 45 minutes or so, maybe a little less than that, to start feeling the effects of caffeine, which we're going to get into next. But with caffeine citrate, you feel it faster. Now, you could think of it as a downside to caffeine citrate is the caffeine content is 50% less than like caffeine anhydrous. So milligram to milligram. So if you have like 200 milligrams of caffeine anhydrous and then 200 milligrams of caffeine citrate, then you're only going to have 100 milligrams of caffeine in the 200 milligrams of caffeine citrate. So it's half. So I'm kind of thinking in my head, well, then what's the benefit of these different forms of caffeine other than what I stated? Like, it kicks in faster for caffeine citrate. Okay, you may not have as many digestive issues with dicaffeine malate. Well, if you kind of combine three, and I haven't seen a product that has this. I'm sure it's out there, but I haven't. I've seen either one or the other in it, which may or may not make sense, but whatever. If you combine it, so like let's say you have caffeine anhydrous and caffeine citrate, then if you take a scoop of that, drink it, then the caffeine citrate is going to make the caffeine kick in quickly. So you'll feel the effect really, really fast. And then as you're going through the workout, then the caffeine anhydrous kicks in. And so it may prolong the effects that you're looking for, I guess you could say, quote, positive effects of caffeine. That's the only thing I think of. It may have been in the article, but I didn't read the whole article. I just kind of read the descriptions. And then I kind of thought of that, like, oh, this may be a benefit if you did it that way. So, so that's pretty much it. I was looking briefly at the notes. It's pretty much it for the types of caffeine. Like I said, we'll keep it pretty brief, trying to keep it high level here. Now we're going to kind of get into a little bit deeper here, but with how caffeine does its job. We drink caffeine in the morning, makes you alert, wakes you up, and then even gives you like a euphoric feeling, almost like you say a high. How does it do that on a cellular level? How does it work? So I feel that in order to explain this, we first need to go back to ATP. So adenosine triphosphate, we talked a shit ton about that in the episode, What Causes Muscle Fatigue, which is a correction episode from the first episode of the pre-workout series, which is on beta-alanine. So every cell in our body uses ATP for energy. Your heart, brain, muscles, go on and on and on. It breaks down ATP in order to harness the energy from it. What we can do, I can talk on this microphone to you guys. I can hold my son. I can sit on my ass, or even when I'm sleeping, because your brain is still working, your heart's still beating, you're still breathing, you're still using energy while you sleep. It's all from ATP. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we are breaking down ATP. Now, because of that, adenosine, it's actually, it said adenosine triphosphate. There is adenosine that is not bonded to any phosphate group. So just to go back, I actually got the diagram that I drew, and I think I put it on social media, of ATP wrong. I did adenine, and then I don't want to bust out the whiteboard again. It's all put up now, but it was like, I'll put it like here, like I'm putting my fingers in a circle. You have like adenine, and then I had like 3 phosphate groups, which is phosphorus and oxygen bonded to it. There's 3 of those attached to the adenine. It's actually adenine and I believe ribose, and those two together make adenosine, and then the phosphate groups are attached to that. One second. So, through the process of our bodies breaking, our cells breaking down ATP to harness the energy, forming ATP again, blah, 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 blah. Eventually, there's going to be a buildup of just adenosine by itself. So the adenine and ribose together, no phosphate groups attached to it. Well, over the course of the day, since we're using more ATP during the day, since we're moving around, exercising, doing our things, instead of just laying on our back sleeping, that builds up. Now, there are receptors, and the receptors I believe the receptors are all over your body, but we're going to specifically talk about the receptors in the brain for adenosine. I believe there's like 4 or 5 that were mentioned in the literature, but with regards to caffeine, we're just going to focus on 2 of those receptors. So just to go back, there are receptors in our brain, and I believe they're all over the body, but we're going to focus on the brain. There's receptors for adenosine, which builds up over the course of a day, because we're breaking down ATP to get energy to do the things we need to do to live. The 2 receptors, like I said, we're going to focus on are A1 receptors, and I believe it's A2a receptors. So we're going to go over first, like, what happens normally, and then we're going to go into how caffeine kind of disrupts all that. So when adenosine attaches to the A1 receptor, so I'm going to go back to an analogy that I've used before. I know think of the receptor and sorry, I got so many thoughts in my head that when I say something, I'm like, wait, maybe I should mention this first. The receptors are on the neurons in our brain. The neurons are like brain cells. So if you can imagine, like if you go to Google right now and you look up, like, show me a map of the internet, you'll see like this gigantic like spider web, and those are all the connections of the internet. And, when you go to www.howardsblend.com, which you can't right now because the site is down, but I'm currently actually working on building the site back up again. But if you go to that, then it's going to follow from wherever you access it from. It's going to follow a certain path in that huge spider web to get to whatever server from the hosting company, wherever their servers are housed, that has that site. So it's similar that I think in our brain, there's this spider web of neurons, these brain cells. Okay. So I just lost my train of thought here. Give me a second here. So the A1 receptors, pardon me. Forgot where I was. On those neurons, there are receptors for adenosine. So like I said, we're going to focus on just two of those in respect to caffeine. The A1 receptors, that's like a lock, okay? The adenosine is like a key. So like I said, I mentioned this before. If you try to unlock a Chevy, if you try to open the door to a Chevy truck, whatever, and you're using a key to a Kia, it's not going to work because the key doesn't match the lock. So if another molecule tries to bind to that A1 receptor, it won't work because it's not made for that molecule. It's made for adenosine. So when adenosine attaches to that A1 receptor, it then sets off like a process, a biochemical process. I didn't look into what the process is because, again, that would get way too far, way deep in the fields and stuff that we didn't need to go over. But it's kind of neat if I go back and go over it. But so when it connects to that receptor, it sets off this process, this biochemical process, which causes the neurons, this like internet in our head, this spider web of connections, to fire, to go down in terms of their activity. So let me focus on that for a second. So I mentioned this, I believe, in the beta-alanine episode. So these neurons in our brain, and somebody out there who knows more about this than me, please correct me. This is my understanding of it. The neurons in our brain, this spider web of these neurons, they're not actually connected. I'm holding my fingers like a quarter of an inch apart, but this is on a microscopic level. There is a gap between the neurons. They're not completely connected. And so like when one neuron fires, and when a neuron fires, it means like an impulse goes. It's actually like electricity, from my understanding, like an electric impulse from this neuron, and it needs to go to another neuron. Well, then how does it cross that little space, that infinitesimally small space where they're not connected? That's where neurotransmitters come in. They're actually chemicals that create like a bridge, so then the impulse can go from one neuron to another neuron to another neuron. But whenever a neuron fires, when you get like that little impulse, that's called an action potential. So when the adenosine attaches to this A1 receptor on our neurons, then it causes the action potential, the impulses from these neurons, to slow down. They decrease, so the activity of our brain decrease. In addition to that, the amount of neurotransmitters, those chemicals that create that bridge for the impulse to go from one neuron to the other, they decrease. So in essence, when adenosine attaches to the A1 receptor, the activity in our brain go down. We get tired. Remember, the adenosine builds up over the course of a day. So as the day goes on, we naturally get sleepy because our brain activity is actually slowing down. So another receptor is the A2a receptor. When adenosine attaches to that A2a receptor, the adenosine molecule is large enough where it doesn't leave enough room for neurotransmitters to also attach to that A2a receptor. The important one we're going to focus on is dopamine. That is, I believe in this case, it is a excitatory neurotransmitter. We talked about that in beta-alanine episode. There's excitatory and inhibitory neurotransmitters. Dopamine, and what we're going to talk about today, is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It causes the action potential in the neurons, which is the impulse, the little impulses, the firing of the neurons. It causes that to go up. So it causes brain activity to go up. Whereas GABA, gamma aminobutyric acid, that is an inhibitory neurotransmitter. I believe I said that GABA was in nootropics, and I was just talking off the top of my head. I thought I saw that, and I didn't really look up any nootropic products, so I don't know if it's in it or not. But I know I've seen it in sleep products, like sleep supplements, which makes sense. It's an inhibitory. GABA causes the activity to go down, the action potential to decrease. So when adenosine attaches to the A2a receptor, there's not enough room left over for dopamine to also attach to the receptor. So that also calms us down, makes us tired, right? And when we go to sleep, through the course of sleep, if you have normal sleep patterns, if you're sleeping, follow sleep hygiene, whatever, as we sleep, our body metabolizes the adenosine. So when you wake up in the morning, you should feel refreshed and ready to kick ass for the day because now all the adenosine is gone. Adenosine's done its job. It's made you tired. You go to sleep. Your body was able to recover. And now you're ready to take on the day again. And this relates to, we're going to circle back on this to give a popular term these days, not to get too political, but the current administration. But we're going to come back to this, I would say, at the end when we talk about negative side effects. We talk about the tolerance and in terms of impacting sleep. When you wake up in the morning, the adenosine is metabolized. You should feel refreshed and ready to go because you had proper sleep. Did I miss anything? Okay, so I've covered that. Covered what it normally happens. So where does caffeine come into play? So when you take caffeine, will start with the A1 receptor. It will attach to the A1 receptor, but it doesn't initiate that biochemical process to calm down our brain activity. I think of it as like, have you ever had it where you use a key on a lock and the key goes all the way in? Like, oh crap, this is going to work, but then you can't turn it left or right or whatever to lock it or unlock it. It fits in the receptor, but it's not the right key. It doesn't activate it. Caffeine's the same way. I believe caffeine's a smaller molecule than adenosine. So it'll fit in that A1 receptor, and since it's there, adenosine can't attach. But it doesn't activate that chemical process to calm us down. So in essence, it's acting, I believe it's called, do I have it in my notes? Because I forgot. Yeah, that was it. Adenosine receptor antagonist. Basically, it's saying, it's like, for a term, it's cock blocking the adenosine molecule. It's saying, nope, you ain't coming in here. And I'm here, but yet I'm not going to initiate the process to calm the brain down. So the brain stays active because there's no chemical process to calm it down. That's how it gets us awake. Like, oh, I feel awake now. I don't feel sleepy anymore. That's what caffeine does to keep us awake. Now, the A2a receptors, again, caffeine, I believe, is a smaller molecule. So when it attaches to the A2a receptors, neurotransmitters can still attach to that receptor as well. The one we're worried about here, or I guess the one that we're going to focus on, is dopamine. Dopamine being excitatory, dopamine can still attach to those receptors. Thus, when we take caffeine, we get that euphoric high. This is what the pre-workout supplements are counting on. When you take it, the supplement manufacturers, supplement companies, when you take the pre-workout with the caffeine in it, we're focusing on this A2a mostly, but also with the A1. But you focus on the A2a, it gives you that euphoric high. You go beast mode and you want to lift 1,000 pounds. That's what it does. It's basically more dopamine is attaching to the receptors. Thus, you get a high. Now, the downside of it, one of the downsides, and we're going to go into this later as well, is tolerance. So when you keep consuming caffeine, after a time, what happens is your body adapts to it. And it adapts by one, it downregulates the production of dopamine. So dopamine levels go down. So there's not as much dopamine to attach to the A2a receptors. Thus, you're not going to get the same high after a time. Now, also, the neurons in your brain that actually have the A1 and the A2a receptors on it, the neurons actually form more A2a receptors. So the number of receptors increase. Thus, you have to take more caffeine to attach to the increased number of receptors. But there's only so much caffeine you can take. We're going to get into dosage here in a sec. And there's the number of receptors keep increasing. Eventually, there's going to be enough adenosine to attach to the receptors to where even if you take caffeine, you're still getting tired because adenosine is going to attach no matter what because the number of receptors increased. All right, so that's tolerance. We're going to go into that later. We're going to go a little bit more into that. Now, we're going to go into like pardon me, I can't even think. We're going to go into the metabolism of caffeine. Half-life. So what's half-life? Half-life is the amount of time it takes for the original amount, we're going to say in this case, the original amount of caffeine to be cut in half. That varies due to many factors. Genetic. So there's genetic factors. Some people are fast metabolizers of caffeine. Other people, like me, I believe I'm a pretty slow metabolizer of caffeine. Also, for women, they're pregnant or breastfeeding. That also slows down the metabolism of caffeine. I don't know if it's because they're pregnant. It changes the amount of an enzyme, which we're going to bring up here next, that helps metabolize caffeine. Don't know. Just the literature says that caffeine in pregnant women and breastfeeding women, I got it right. Pregnant and breastfeeding women, they metabolize caffeine at a slower rate. So the half-life ranges anywhere from like 3 hours to 10 hours. So if you're fast, you can metabolize, the half-life is 3 hours. If you're slow, it's 10 hours. So for example, if you're fast and it's 3 hours, if you take that pre-workout with 200 milligrams of caffeine anhydrous at 9 o'clock, by noon, the amount still active in your system is 100 milligrams. And then by 3, it's 50 milligrams. And then by 6, it's 25 milligrams. Then by 9, it's 12 milligrams, 12.5 milligrams, except until it's completely gone. Now, the enzyme responsible for metabolizing caffeine is, I think it's CYP1A1 and 1A2. I believe those are the enzymes. I believe they're produced in the liver. So when they metabolize caffeine, they break them down into the metabolites, which, pardon me, I'm trying to remember. I believe it's like araxanthine. I may have pronounced that wrong. I think it's like ARAXANTHINE. I'm not sure of that. I'm just doing pure off of memory on the notes, but theobromine and theophylline. I think those are the metabolites of caffeine when that enzyme breaks it down. So the genetic factor. Some people, like me, you can get it tested. I haven't had it tested. I'm just going off of how I feel. More than likely, my body naturally makes a lower amount of that CYP1A1 and 1A2 enzyme to break down caffeine. Other people, I think I don't know. I was trying to think of somebody's name who said they actually had the genetic test, and I don't know. I forgot their name. But they actually had the genetic test, said, oh yeah, I'm actually a fast metabolizer of caffeine. They have more of that enzyme. This is why I was going back with pregnant and breastfeeding women. I don't know if being pregnant and breastfeeding, if that just somehow going through that process, it just naturally lowers the amount of that enzyme that the liver makes. I have no clue. It's just, that's where people are different. Somebody of the same weight, same body fat percentage, muscle, whatever, but they could metabolize caffeine at a completely different rate because just genetically one makes more of this enzyme than the other. So you can see kind of where I'm leading to in terms of, tolerance and possible negative effects is if let's say I'm a slow receptor and it takes me, for me, I think I am, it takes me 10 hours, let's say, to do half-life, to metabolize caffeine for a half-life. If I take a scoop of pre-workout at 9 a.m. and it has 200 milligrams of caffeine anhydrous, with 7 p.m. at night, I still have 100 milligrams. That's a cup of coffee in my system at 7 o'clock at night. So you see where some people may have a more pronounced negative side effect than other people. So that pretty much covers like how caffeine works, like how it does it. So, eventually, again, over time, your neurons in your brain are going to make more receptors. So then, the same amount of caffeine is not going to work because adenosine is still able to attach to those receptors. Also, the brain produces less dopamine, so you're not going to get that same euphoric, that same high that you felt the first time you drank coffee, or in this case, you took pre-workout, what they call it, straight to the dome, where you just take the scoop and you just put it in your mouth, the powder, and then you drink water or whatever to mix it in your mouth. That's what she said. All right, so I'm going to turn the page here. I'm going to be careful not to hit the boom arm again. I got 3 pages of notes. This is for people watching it, and I guess you can listen to it too. It would benefit, but I don't know. I got maybe like 7 or 8 resources that I used. I used examine.com, which is a great site for anybody who wants to know more about supplements, because then they reference other documents that they got their information from. There is a paid site, but you can also get the information for free on there. It's a good site. It's got good stuff on it. Okay, so dosage. Give me a second. Let me set this back up. I don't want to hit the boom arm and then cause. And my notes are all flying around everywhere. So one second. Little Sammy is behind me. I have the blanket on the floor in the bedroom on the other side of the door to the closet, and he is fast asleep. So hopefully he'll stay that way. Okay, dosage. So this is part number 2, all right? Yeah, part number 3, pardon me. So the literature says that for the average, like, healthy adult, 400 milligrams a day is considered kind of, quote, safe. To me, that's a lot of caffeine. I mean, most of the pre-workouts I've seen are roughly like 200 milligrams of caffeine per serving. So that's like 2 servings of pre-workout. But if you only take 1 serving, that's 200 milligrams. Well, if you have a cup of coffee, maybe you have a can of Coke, which I think a can of Coke is like 50 milligrams of caffeine. If you like Mountain Dew, whatever, you drink that, or you use like chocolate, which I think chocolate has some caffeine in it. Maybe drink tea, which again has some caffeine in it. I can see where it can add up quickly if you're not really paying attention. To me, that just seems like a lot of caffeine, 400 milligrams a day. But that's for an average person. Again, we're going to get into that. If you're pregnant or breastfeeding, that amount of caffeine is going to go down because you're not able to metabolize it as fast. If you get the genetic testing, or like me, if you just kind of have an inkling that, hey, I'm pretty slow at metabolizing caffeine, probably not a good idea to take that much. Again, the half-life, I take 400 milligrams at 9 in the morning. Well, at 7 at night, I still have 2 cups of coffee running through my system. So, yeah, it's not going to be great for sleep, which we're going to talk about with the tolerance. So also the pregnant and breastfeeding one, what we just mentioned. The literature mentions 200 to 300 milligrams a day is considered kind of safe. 300 are kind of pushing it. You may want to go for the 200 milligrams. Again, I'm not a professional. I'm not giving medical advice. This is just my opinion. If you're pregnant or breastfeeding, probably best to try to keep your caffeine content as low as possible, as you can, especially through the breast milk, pass that on to the child. And we're going to get into children and adolescents here next. But I don't think it's a good idea to give them a lot of caffeine. I just don't think it's a good idea at all. But again, please consult with your doctor first. Take their opinion way over mine. So, 200 to 300 milligrams. 200 is preferable to 300. Children and adolescents. So children, I'm thinking like 6 to 10 years old. Adolescents, I think, are usually around 10 to 19, and then when you finish your teenage years. What it refers to is 2.5 to 3 milligrams per kilogram per day of caffeine. My son, little Sam's about 30. Am I getting that right? He's about 30 pounds. I think I got it right. Maybe a little less than that. Which equates to about 30 to 36 milligrams per day. So that's about a cup of tea, like green tea, decaffeinated or not decaffeinated. I think it's about a cup of tea that he should have of caffeine. So my opinion, again, this is my opinion, getting out the research, this is just my 2 cents. I don't think it's a good idea to give kids any caffeine, or at least try to keep it as low as possible. I remember, I'm not going to call out any names, when I was in elementary school, there was a gentleman that was in our class, and he was a hyperactive student. He's very hyperactive, and I think he was on like medication for it. He would bring a Jolt Cola. Any of you guys and gals who are old school remember Jolt Cola? The selling point was that it was high in caffeine. He would bring a Jolt Cola to school every day and drink it. And I remember hearing the teacher saying, like, why are his parents giving him a Jolt Cola when he's taking medication for hyperactivity? That's ridiculous. So the point is, like, with children, their brains are growing, their brains are developing, and children already have a high amount of energy. Why do they need a chemical that basically doesn't let their brain shut off and makes them even more euphoric? Their brains are growing. They need proper rest in order to recover and then fully grow to their full potential. So my opinion is, try to keep caffeine as low as possible. My son Sam, who's sleeping behind me, he's doing his great, wonderful, excellent, tremendous supervisor job as normal. I do, when I make his drink, I will use at times my Howard's Blend plant-based protein powder. It's chocolate, so I'm sure there's minuscule amounts of caffeine already in it because it uses like cacao and stuff in it. I'm sure there is, but I'm not giving him tons and tons and tons and tons of the powder. So he's going to get it. Kids are going to get caffeine just by eating food because, again, it's in like chocolate, it's in like certain nuts, cola nuts. I don't know any kids who eat that. But they're going to get it if you give them like a Coca-Cola, they're going to get it in some form or another. Is just try to keep it as low as you possibly can. I get upset when the missus, and I'm not just blaming her, when she gives Sam like some of her Coca-Cola. It's like, no, it's not good. I don't think you should be drinking that stuff. But that's my opinion. I'm not putting my wife under the bus. I mean, I understand. So we don't give him a whole can. We give him like a little bit of sip of it, but I just don't think it's a good idea. So 2.5 to 3 milligrams per kilogram of body weight per day. Like I said, my opinion, you should try to get it even lower than that if you can, because their brains are growing. You don't want any chemicals to disrupt their sleep and disrupt their brain activity when they need to be growing and resting properly. And then, health concerns. If you have hypertension, high blood pressure, if you have a heart issue, if you have neurological issues, hell, even if you have like diabetes or, if you're not sure, please talk to your doctor first about caffeine consumption. Most doctors, you can log into a portal and send them a message, and then they'll reply back to you with information on it. It's not like you have to make an appointment to go in there. A lot of doctors do that now. It's better to be safe than sorry. If you have any thoughts about this, don't just start taking caffeine because it's a stimulant. Just check with the doctor first. That's all I can ask. Because again, better safe than sorry. So overdoses. The literature mentioned overdose. So what's considered an overdose is 10 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, which is a lot. That's a lot. So for me, I don't want to do the math. I range anywhere from like 65 to 70 kilograms. Right now I'm around 145 pounds. So that's 650 to 700 milligrams of caffeine is an overdose for me. Add to that, I'm a slow, or more than likely a slow metabolizer of caffeine. Now, I do know of one product off the top of my head that has like 700 milligrams of caffeine pre-workout per serving. Is it Assassin by Apollo Nutrition? I think it is. I think it's Assassin is the name of the supplement. It's not a knock on the product. I'm just saying, just statement. I think it's like 700 milligrams of caffeine per serving. For me, that would be an overdose of caffeine if it was, this document is correct, assuming that I'm a slow metabolizer. It's probably correct. And it's 10 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram of body weight. That would probably be an overdose for me. So I won't use that product. That doesn't mean it's not going to affect somebody else. Somebody who's 200 pounds, where it could be 2,000 milligrams of caffeine, then is an overdose for them. They can more likely, and if they metabolize it faster than I do, they could probably take the product and have no problem at all. It's all individual. Everybody's different. So that's the point of this. This is just general numbers, I think, that the document is referencing to. Now, toxicity, so a level that can kill you. This is unbelievable. I don't even know how this is possible. 150 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. How the fuck can you take in 100? That's a cup and a half of coffee per kilogram of body weight. That's unbelievable. So I'd have to, for me, if I'm 70 kilograms, I'd have to take 105 cups of coffee a day. And that would be lethal. I would be in the bathroom like all day if I just got even close to half of that amount of caffeine. Half of that amount of coffee. That's an unbelievable amount. So apparently somebody must have gotten to that level because that's how they figured out it was lethal. I don't know. Maybe they tested on animals or whatever. I don't know. I didn't see the details on it. That's an unbelievable amount of caffeine. 150 milligrams per kilogram of body weight. Wow. So that's it for dosage. Sum it up. Everybody is different. It's consult with your doctor, get the genetic testing, whatever it is, to find out where you are. If you're unsure, I guess this is my general rule. If you're unsure, less is more. I take a pre-workout. I have like a pre-workout in the kitchen now. I was getting ready to take, so I'm going to go lift weights in a little bit. I use like 1/4 of a scoop. In the scoop, I'm going to hold my fingers for the camera. It's literally like maybe that's 1/4 of an inch. That's the size of the scoop. It's like a really tiny scoop. I use like 1/4 of that. And the scoop is I think it's like 200 milligrams of caffeine. So it's what would that be? 50 milligrams of caffeine? That seems to work fine for me. And I don't use it every day. I go off and on it, which we'll talk about later. Find out what works for you. If you're unsure, talk to your doctor first. If you get the green light from the doctor and everything, my suggestion, this is usually on the bottles as well. They'll say start with a half a scoop. Start small. You can always take a little bit more if you don't feel anything. But start with a little bit and then go from there. Don't start with a lot because then you can't do anything once you've already ingested too much. Negative side effects. This is the last section of the episode. We're at 43 minutes. This is a little bit longer than I intended, but it's okay. I think I'm giving good information here, folks. Good information. Tolerance. We talked about that before. Eventually, you keep using caffeine, the neurons in your brain are going to make more A2a receptors. The amount of dopamine your brain makes down-regulates, so it decreases. So eventually, you're going to create a tolerance to it. And it's not going to have the same amount of caffeine is not going to have the same effect. So you're going to have to take more caffeine to get the same effect. And as we talked about with the overdose and the lethal amount and the dosage, there's only so much you can go with that before you start getting into a dangerous level. But tolerance, this is where the danger I see in it, the side effect, is you create this vicious cycle. So I'll use me as an example. So let's assume I have either never taken caffeine before, or I have weaned myself off of caffeine, which I didn't do, but I'll talk about that later. I've weaned myself off caffeine. I haven't used caffeine for several months or whatever, and I'm going to cycle back on caffeine. I'm going to start using it again to go help with my workouts, increase the intensity. So I get the scoop of the pre-workout that's in the kitchen, 200 milligrams of caffeine, let's say. Let's say I take it at 9 a.m. I'm working second shifts, so I don't have to be at work till like 2 or 3 or whatever. I'm going to go hit the gym, then go to work. Let's say that. I take a scoop, 200 milligrams of caffeine, go work out, kill it in the gym, whatever, go to work. Let's also go with my genetics, which I think I am a slow metabolizer of caffeine. So let's say I'm on the 10-hour to get the half-life of caffeine. So if I take it at 9, at 7 o'clock at night, then I still have 100 milligrams, a cup of coffee of caffeine active in my body. And let's say I get off of work, what would that be? 2 to 10 is 8 hours. So like 10 o'clock I get off of work, let's say, because 2 to 10 would be 8 hours. So 10 o'clock, let me go back here. So 7 o'clock at night, I have 100 milligrams of caffeine, still a cup of coffee in my system, all right? 7 hours from that, which would be 2 in the morning, I still have 50 milligrams, which is a can of Coke. By 2 in the morning, I should be asleep. But since I still have 50 milligrams of caffeine, I haven't taken it before, or I'll say in this case, I'm cycling back on caffeine. So I'm very sensitive to caffeine's effects. That 50 milligrams is probably still going to keep me awake at 2 a.m. when I should be asleep. Getting rest to recover from the workout, getting rest so my body can repair itself and my body can remove all that adenosine that's been built up. But I can't. It's hard for me to sleep because I still have all that caffeine in my system from the pre-workout from 20 hours ago or whatever it was. Yeah, it would be 20 hours. Would it be 20 hours? Maybe I was doing 8 hours. Whatever, you get my point. It would be 9 to 7 would be 100 milligrams. And then 7 o'clock to 5 o'clock, 5 o'clock the next morning, I still have 50 milligrams of caffeine. Well, that still could be having an effect on me because I'm very sensitive to caffeine's effects. I was thinking 8 hours with the work shift, but it's 10 hours for my metabolism to break down the caffeine. So I find it hard to go to sleep because caffeine is still keeping my brain active. The dopamine is still attaching. It's giving me that high. I'm like rolling around in bed. I can't sleep. So then I have trouble sleeping. So the next day, eventually, when I get to the point where the caffeine amount is low enough, the CYP1A1 and 1A2 have metabolized it enough to where I can actually rest, well, I got to wake up to go to work again. I may not have to work out that day, maybe an off day, but I have to go to work again. And I'm lethargic because I wasn't able to sleep. What do? Oh, I guess I need to take a scoop of pre-workout to wake me up because I don't want to be asleep at work. I got a job to do. So I take a scoop of pre-workout and the cycle starts again. Only this time, when it bothers my sleep at night, then that's 2 nights where I haven't been able to sleep. Or I haven't been able to sleep well. So now it's this compounding effect. Now it's 2 nights. Shit, my body's going to be even tired. Well, I need to take a scoop again because I'm tired. Eventually it gets to the point where my body becomes tolerant. And when I've had such horrible sleep for, 2 weeks or whatever it is, that in order to get that same waking effect for me to wake me up, to give me that high, to get ready to kill the day, whatever at work or kill the gym, I now have to take a scoop and a half of pre-workout to get the same effect. I have to take more. Or even worse, I mix the pre-workout in coffee, so you're getting double the amount of caffeine, which is not recommended. Don't do that. So you can see where it's creating this cycle to where eventually what will happen is in the morning, I'll feel like such like shit. I'll feel horrible because I'm not resting well. Now you're getting this idea of the adrenal fatigue, which we'll go into that. I'm not going to go into that because I'm just talking about personal experience, which I'll get here in a little bit. But you're just tired all the time because you're not resting. You're taking the caffeine to keep your brain active all the time. But you get to the point where you need caffeine to get you to the starting point. You'll need caffeine to get you to the feeling, that same feeling you felt, or I felt, the first day I took the caffeine. So in order to get to baseline, in order to get to that same mental alertness, the same feeling that I had the very first day that I took caffeine, or I took the pre-workout, before that first workout, that first day, I need to take a bunch of caffeine just to get to that level. I can't even get to the euphoric high and the alertness. Oh, pardon me, I hit the microphone there. Hopefully I can edit that out. I hit the pop filter. But I have to take caffeine in order to just to get me to the baseline. I can't even get to that level of alertness or the level of that euphoric high that I had originally because I've become tolerant to it. And that's where you create this vicious cycle where you have to take more and more and more. But as I talked about with the overdose, there's only so much you can take before eventually your body adapts to it, creates the more receptors, lowers the amount of dopamine, and then you're just taking it just to get baseline. I mean, again, I hate doing this, but it's a perfect example. My wife, she needs a cup or two of coffee every morning or else she gets a bad headache. That's a symptom of withdrawal because now it's like her body craves it just to wake her up in the morning. She needs the coffee because it's her body's now craving it because it's become addicted to it. And again, it's not to badmouth her. I've talked about how I'm going to mention it here in a little bit, but I was addicted earlier to artificial sweeteners. I had to use packets and packets and packets of Equal and Splenda to get that level of sweetness that I needed because my taste buds had become, let me take a moment so I can pronounce it, desensitized. I always get that wrong. Desensitized to the level of sweetness. I needed it sweeter and sweeter and sweeter. Just like with caffeine, you need more and more and more to get that same effect. But eventually we lose because the body will adapt and then there's only so much caffeine you can take in. Just making sure I didn't. Yeah, so me, I'll go back to my example. So years ago, I was, what would it be? The last was 4 years ago. I was a network engineer, started with the job. I was a technician, then became a network engineer. And I would go to the Walmart and buy a bottle of C4, which is a popular pre-workout supplement. Not going to badmouth the product. I took it, it's a very accessible, relatively inexpensive pre-workout that you can buy from like a big box store like Walmart. I even remember a few years ago, I think I saw it a long time ago. I don't really use Facebook anymore. I still have an account, but I don't use it anymore really. But I took a picture of it on my kitchen countertop and I said like, this shit is the shit. Because it helped us working second shift, and then I would work later in that because I was just trying to do stuff, trying to help everybody out, whatever. It helped keep me awake, but eventually it's like, oh, it's just loaded with caffeine. That's what's keeping me awake. So again, I'm not bad-mouthing the product. It's just that's what was accessible, but that's what we took. A lot of us, we would take a scoop of the C4, drink it, and then we're off to the races to get break-fix stuff. Get it fixed, do some troubleshooting and stuff. So let's see if there's anything else I wanted to mention with that. Yeah, so it's basically, eventually you'll get addicted to it, and then when you try to, talking about the tolerance, when you try to stop it, and you're trying to get off the caffeine, then you go through withdrawal. Like my wife, she gets headaches and stuff. That's a symptom of withdrawal. I don't recommend it, but for me, I was able to stop the caffeine cold turkey. It's just one day, just stopped. And I didn't really go through I didn't feel any withdrawal. At least it wasn't enough for me to be like suffering. It was similar to when I decided one day just to go plant-based. I decided to cut out all meat products one day. I remember actually this way before I met my wife, I went on a date and then we went to have sushi. And sushi was really good. And then for whatever reason, I woke up the next morning and I said, you know what? I am not going to eat meat anymore. And I just decided right there and there, I just stopped it. So it's the same with caffeine. I was taking all these pre-workouts. No joke. I was taking the scoops of the powder, pouring it into a cup so it wouldn't spill everywhere like a plastic cup. And I would literally just drink the powder straight. You can't really drink it, but I would, I guess, consume the powder straight without water or anything. That's how I was taking scoops of it every day. One day I just said, that's enough. And I just stopped. And I didn't consume it for a long time. Now I do, like I said earlier, but very, very, very minuscule, very rarely do I take it. Maybe at most like 2 times a week. I take like a quarter of a scoop or something like that. So if you're going to get off caffeine, I recommend personally, again, not an expert, just my personal experience with people who've tried it as well to cut it out. like slowly lower the dose. If coffee's your thing or pre-workout's your thing, instead of doing a whole scoop of pre-workout or 3 cups of coffee, try like 2 cups of coffee. Try like 3/4 of a scoop of pre-workout. Then after a time, go to like half a scoop, go to like a cup of coffee. Slowly wean yourself off so you don't go through withdrawal symptoms that may be worse. 1 second. Let's see what is next. I think I'm on the last page. We are almost at an hour, folks. We're doing good. We're doing good. We're on the home stretch now. All right. So the next negative side effect is blood pressure. So an increase in blood pressure from taking caffeine can be seen with people who have hypertension, so they already have high blood pressure. Caffeine can increase the blood pressure even more. And like my example I used, got myself off of caffeine and then I'm starting to use it again, or somebody who's never used caffeine, so they're very sensitive to caffeine's effects. I guess you say an acute rise in blood pressure can occur. But it also mentions in the resource that it's not really known what are the long-term effects of caffeine. So when I say acute, in the short term, your blood pressure goes up, but over a long period of time, it's not really known if there's a long-term effect on blood pressure, and or cardiovascular disease, what it can do for that, what can happen over the long run. Now, this part here, reading through this stuff, I'm just kind of thinking things in my head. This next part here is just kind of like my assumption. I didn't get this from the documents. I'm just thinking it. So if you consume caffeine and it's caffeine's attaching to like the A1 receptor, adenosine can't attach, your brain is still active. It doesn't have a chance to calm down, and the neurotransmitters are still going, keeping your brain firing. Well, going back to kind of the tolerances is keeping you awake and you're not sleeping. Well, then that's going to convert your body more into a sympathetic nervous mode, sympathetic dominant. So I talked about that before. You have the sympathetic, which is like fight or flight. That's the part of your nervous system. You have the parasympathetic, which is termed the rest and digest, the building up. Well, if you're taking the caffeine as a stimulant to stimulate your mind's active, it's changing the physiology of your body, and you're kind of like in a go mode all the time because you're stimulated from it. That's going to make you more sympathetic dominant, which then could cause your hypothalamus, which is a gland on the very bottom of your brain. So I'm pointing to my nose. It's like literally at the bottom of your brain. I believe it's next to the part of your brain that senses smell. But it causes that hypothalamus then to signal to your adrenal glands, which I talked about adrenal fatigue, on the top of your kidneys to release adrenaline, fight or flight. The body doesn't know whether you're running from a tiger or fighting off, other cavemen groups or whatever. You're fighting for your life, or in this case, you're just taking in coffee. It doesn't know the difference. It just says, "Oh, this is the nervous system's being ticked off, sympathetic dominant. Let me release adrenaline," which adrenaline then can increase your your heart rate as well as blood pressure. Maybe that's why it's like an acute rise in blood pressure. I have no clue. I really don't know. I'm just kind of making an assumption there. So that's it for the blood pressure. We'll move on from that. Last one, we talked about this, referenced this with the dicaffeine malate, is that the document says, I think they say, quote, a significant dose. So I think it said 3 or more cups of coffee, which I've seen people that's like a low dose for them. Like 3 cups of coffee is like what I was talking about, the tolerance. That just gets them to baseline for the day. But it mentions something about mixing it in water. So I don't know, maybe it's the volume of liquid with the caffeine. I don't know, that's what I got from my notes. I don't know if that was what it was referenced in those. I didn't look back at the resource or not. But the idea of it is that a significant amount of caffeine could cause a drop in pressure. And I'm pointing to like the bottom of my sternum, the top of my stomach there, the lower esophageal sphincter. So at the bottom of your esophagus, like when you eat food, at the bottom of the esophagus, there's a sphincter, so it's like a hole. And it opens and closes depending on if you have food, you're eating food or drinking, a drink. So it opens up to allow the food to go into your stomach, and then it should close. Well, in some people, the sphincter actually won't open. So it's like the food gets stuck in their esophagus. It's hard to open. In other people who have like GERD, gastric esophageal reflux disease, acid reflux, that sphincter sometimes won't close. And so when the stomach starts getting, it starts producing more acid to digest the food, that acid could splash up into the esophagus, burning it. And that's that burning feeling you have in your esophagus. Where over the long term, it can cause lesions and, unfortunately, it can turn to cancer. So you need to treat that. What it's pointing to is that if you're drinking or consuming a lot of caffeine, that it could cause the pressure in that lower esophageal sphincter to go down. Thus, it's not, because the pressure is what keeps it closed. And if the pressure decreases, then it can open up, thus causing acid to go up into your esophagus, possibly, and then causing heartburn. So I don't know if that's how dicaffeine malate, maybe it doesn't cause your stomach to produce as much acid. I didn't see that in the Tiger Fitness article. I have no clue. I don't know how it does. Those are kind of related to it. Yeah, there's a story I was going to include when I was taking medication for osteoporosis about it and burning of your esophagus. But that's not related to stomach acid. That's related to the medicine itself. And I have it on my list to do another episode on osteoporosis since I used to have that. But that's it. That's all that I have. So I trust it was good information. I trust you enjoyed the show. And if you enjoyed the show, if you found value in it, you like the information provided here, if it inspired you to do research on caffeine yourself, or you know someone who may benefit from this episode, please share it. If I make a post on social media, with it, with the video of me recording my beautiful face, all the women love to look at me, everything, all that good stuff. Share the post. Share it. Hey, you see it on one of the platforms I'm on, which is Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play. Damn, I always forget this. Pandora, iHeartRadio, and Amazon Music. See all that? Share it. Take a screenshot. Share it from the app, whatever it is, with somebody who may benefit from it. That's the best thing you can do to support me, for me providing this information to you guys and gals. If you have any questions, forgot what I was going to say there. Questions, comments, cheers, jeers, whatever. Hit me up. My email, as well as where you can find me, is in the description of, my email, as well as where you can find me on social media, is in the description of the show. Please email me with anything. If you want to tell me, Howard, your fucking show sucks, I hate you, then email me. If you're a beautiful woman, you want to email me saying, Howard, you're so beautiful, you're the most good-looking man I've ever seen, please email me. I'm good with that. It's good to have people that appreciate beauty when they see it. Yeah, it's all in the description of the show, folks, so don't hesitate. Reach out for any reason. Even if you want to talk about, hey, Howard, what's your opinion on who's going to win the World Series this year? I don't know. I don't follow baseball anymore. So I don't know, but I'll look it up and maybe give you an ill-informed opinion on it. But that's it. I can't think of anything else. That is all the information that I have in my notes. With that said, thanks again for listening. I've gone way longer than I expected, but I think it was worth it. From the Batcave studio, Supervisor Sammy, who is asleep, and your host, Howard Blend, are out. Until next time, I'm going to take some pre-workout.